I'm Mia Carter, 29, and literally last weekend, my rep as the family glue? Yeah. It totally backfired. The piece I'd been holding together, the one I worked my butt off to keep solid, it blew up into a full-on family meltdown at our so-called happy reunion. My older sister, Claire, straight up demanded I pick her side in a pointless argument over Dad's estate, and when I clapped back, the room went dead silent. "You just ruined us," Claire yelled, with everyone staring like I'd set the table on fire. But here's the tea. Their shade didn't break me, it lit a spark. I'm not just pushing back, I'm about to flip the script and change everything. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, hit subscribe, and stay with me for the most satisfying revenge you'll ever hear. Looking back, it's almost unreal what I'll do once that moment arrives. I stood there, frozen in the middle of Aunt Linda's dining room, the smell of her famous lasagna still lingering, while every pair of eyes drilled into me. My hands gripped the edge of the table, knuckles whitening, as Claire's words echoed in my head. Ruined us? Me? The one who'd spent years playing mediator, smoothing over every petty squabble, every bruised ego, just to keep this family from fracturing? My heart pounded, a mix of anger and betrayal churning in my chest. I could feel the weight of their stares, Mom's tight-lipped frown, Dad's averted gaze, my brother Ethan's awkward cough into his napkin. Even Aunt Linda, usually the peacemaker, just sat there, her fork hovering over her plate like she was afraid to move. I forced a breath, trying to steady myself. "Claire," I said, my voice low but sharp, "I'm not your punching bag." Her eyes widened, like she hadn't expected me to push back. She leaned forward, her perfectly manicured nails tapping the table, each click like a countdown to war. "Oh, Mia, always so dramatic," she said, her tone dripping with that patronizing edge she'd perfected over the years. "You think you're above us, don't you? With your little projects and your big ideas?" She air-quoted the last part and Ethan snickered, though he tried to hide it behind his glass of wine. I wanted to scream. Little projects? Big ideas? They had no clue. None of them did. For years, I'd poured my soul into something they couldn't even begin to understand, something I'd kept hidden because I knew they'd mock it. My fingers twitched, itching to pull out my phone and shove the truth in their faces right then and there. But I didn't. Not yet. Instead, I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms, letting the silence stretch. "You don't know me," I said finally, my voice steady despite the storm inside. "You never have." Mom cleared her throat, her classic move to diffuse tension. "Mia, honey, let's not escalate this," she said, her voice soft but laced with that familiar disappointment. "Always the same script. Mia, don't rock the boat. Mia, keep the peace. Mia, be the good girl." I glanced at her, my chest tightening. Her graying hair was pulled back in a neat bun, her eyes pleading for me to just let it go. But I couldn't. Not this time. Dad, as usual, stayed silent, his fork scraping against his plate like he was studying it for answers. Ethan, meanwhile, was scrolling on his phone under the table, probably texting his girlfriend about how crazy I was being. And Claire? She just smirked, like she'd won some invisible battle. I could feel the heat rising in my face, the years of being overlooked, dismissed, and underestimated bubbling up. I'd spent my whole life trying to prove myself to them. My parents, my siblings, this whole family who saw me as the odd one out, the dreamer who'd never amount to anything. I pushed my chair back, the scrape against the hardwood floor louder than I meant it to be. "I'm done," I said, not loud but firm. Every head snapped up. Aunt Linda's fork finally dropped, clattering against her plate. "Done with what?" Claire asked, her smirk fading just a fraction. I looked her dead in the eyes, my heart racing but my resolve solid. "Done being your doormat." I turned to leave, my sneakers squeaking on the polished floor, but Claire's voice stopped me cold. "You walk out, Mia, and you're walking out on all of us." I froze, my hand on the doorframe. The threat hung heavy, like a guillotine waiting to drop. I could feel their eyes again, waiting for me to fold, to apologize, to be the good little sister who always backed down. But something inside me snapped. I turned back just enough to meet Claire's gaze. "Good," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Maybe it's time." I stepped outside, the cool night air hitting my face like a slap. My hands were shaking as I fumbled for my car keys, my mind racing with everything I hadn't said. They thought they knew me, thought they had me all figured out. The flaky one, the artsy one, the one who'd never live up to Claire's law degree or Ethan's tech startup. But they didn't know the half of it. For years, I'd been building something in secret, something bigger than their narrow little world could ever imagine. And as I slid into my car, the engine humming to life, I made a promise to myself. I wasn't just going to prove them wrong. I was going to make them regret ever underestimating me. The drive home was a blur, streetlights streaking past as I replayed the dinner in my head. Claire's smug face, Mom's disappointed sigh, Dad's silence, Ethan's indifference. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, my nails digging into the leather. They thought they could break me with their words, their judgment. But they didn't know what was coming. My phone buzzed in the passenger seat, a notification lighting up the screen. I glanced at it, my heart skipping a beat. It was an email from my business partner, marked urgent. The subject line read, "We're almost there." I didn't open it, not yet. I needed to breathe, to process, to let the fire in my chest settle into something sharper, more focused. By the time I pulled into my apartment complex, the anger had morphed into something else, determination. I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore. I was fighting for every moment they'd made me feel small, every time they'd dismissed my dreams. I grabbed my phone, staring at the email notification. Whatever was in there, it was big, life-changing, and it was mine. I leaned back against the headrest, closing my eyes. Tomorrow, I'd face the family again at the annual dinner. Tomorrow, I'd walk into the lion's den with my head high. Tomorrow, everything would change. The engine's hum faded as I sat in my car, the streetlights casting long shadows across the dashboard. My hands still gripped the wheel, but my mind was already slipping back to those moments that had carved themselves into me, the ones that made last night's fight feel like just another chapter in a long, exhausting book. I could still hear Claire's voice from the reunion, sharp and cutting, but it wasn't new. It was an echo of a lifetime of being invisible, of watching my family lift my siblings onto pedestals while I stood in the shadows, my hands full of dreams they couldn't be bothered to see. I was 16, sitting at the kitchen table, my sketchbook open to a design I'd spent weeks perfecting. A prototype for a sustainable clothing line I'd dreamed up for a school project. My fingers were smudged with pencil lead, my eyes burning from late nights stitching samples in my room. I'd won first place at the regional fair, a big deal for a kid like me, and I was bursting to share it. Mom was bustling around setting out plates for dinner when I slid the certificate across the table. "Look, Mom," I said, my voice bright with hope. "I won." She glanced at it, her lips twitching into a quick smile before she turned back to the stove. "That's nice, Mia," she said, distracted. "But help me set the table, okay? Ethan's bringing home his report card." Ethan strolled in minutes later, waving a piece of paper like it was a royal decree. "Straight A's, as usual." Dad clapped him on the back, his face lit up with pride. "That's my boy," he said, ruffling Ethan's hair. Claire, home from college, chimed in with her own news, accepted into some prestigious law internship. The table erupted in cheers, Mom beaming, Dad pouring extra wine. I sat there, my certificate forgotten, my sketchbook pushed aside to make room for the mashed potatoes. I traced the edge of my plate with my fork, my chest tight, waiting for someone to ask about my win. No one did. It wasn't just that night. It was every night, every milestone. When I got my first paid design gig at 19, creating logos for a local startup, I rushed home to tell them. Dad was on the phone, bragging about Claire's latest courtroom victory. Mom was fussing over Ethan's new tech job, some Silicon Valley dream he'd landed. I stood in the doorway, my news burning in my throat, but the words never made it out. "Mia, grab the laundry," Mom called without looking up. I swallowed hard, my excitement curdling into something heavy, and shuffled off to the basement. By 23, I'd started my own small business, custom apparel, eco-friendly, built from scratch with every cent I'd saved from waitressing. I'd stay up until 3 a.m., sewing, sketching, emailing suppliers, my fingers calloused and my eyes bloodshot. When I finally launched my website, I invited the family to a small celebration at my tiny apartment. I'd baked cookies, set up a laptop to show my designs. Claire showed up late, scrolling through her phone. Ethan didn't come, some urgent coding project. Mom and Dad stayed for 20 minutes, Mom murmuring about how cute my hobby was before they left for Ethan's startup pitch event. I stood alone in my living room, the cookies untouched, my laptop still open to a glowing customer review. I closed it, my hands shaking, and promised myself I'd stop trying to win their approval. But I didn't stop hoping. Not entirely. There was always a part of me that thought, maybe this time. Maybe when they saw how far I'd come, they'd get it. I'd imagine Dad's gruff voice softening, saying, "Mia, I'm proud of you." Mom's eyes lighting up, not with pity, but with awe. Claire, for once, speechless. Ethan looking up from his phone. It was a fantasy I couldn't shake, even as the evidence piled up. Like the Christmas I was 26, when I gifted them custom jackets I'd designed, each one tailored to their style, hours of work poured into every stitch. Claire tossed hers over a chair, muttering about another art project. Ethan said he'd wear it later but never did. Mom hung hers in the closet. I found it months later, still in the gift bag. Dad just nodded, said, "Nice work," and changed the subject to Claire's promotion. I blinked, back in my car, the memory fading but the ache still fresh. My phone buzzed again, another notification, probably from my business partner. I ignored it for now, my thumb brushing the edge of the screen as I stared out at the empty parking lot. Those moments, those slights, they weren't just oversights. They were a message, loud and clear. I didn't fit the Carter family mold. Claire was the golden child, the lawyer who could do no wrong. Ethan was the tech genius, the future billionaire. And me? I was the dreamer, the one who messed around with fabrics while they built real careers. I leaned my head back, closing my eyes. They didn't know about the late nights, the loans I'd paid off, the clients I'd won. They didn't know about the empire I was building in secret, the one that was about to change everything. I opened my eyes, my jaw tightening. Tomorrow's family dinner loomed like a storm cloud, the annual gathering where I'd face them all again. Claire's smirks, Ethan's indifference, Mom's placating smiles, Dad's silence. I could already hear the backhanded comments, feel the weight of their expectations. But this time I wasn't the same Mia. This time I had something they couldn't ignore, something I'd fought for tooth and nail. I started the car, the engine roaring to life. Let them underestimate me one more time, let them try to box me in. I wasn't just going to walk into that dinner, I was going to walk in ready to rewrite the story they'd told about me my whole life. The engine's growl faded as I pulled into my apartment's parking lot, the night air cool against my skin as I stepped out. My phone buzzed again, the screen glowing with that same urgent email from my business partner Sarah. I slid my thumb across the screen, hesitating, then tucked it into my pocket. Not yet. My head was still spinning from the reunion, from the weight of Claire's words and the sting of being invisible for so long. But as I climbed the stairs to my apartment, my mind drifted to the one thing that had kept me grounded through it all. My secret. The project that had become my lifeline, my defiance, my proof that I was more than their dismissive glances. I flicked on the light, my tiny living room coming into view, fabric swatches pinned to a corkboard, a sewing machine humming faintly from last night's work, and my laptop open to a spreadsheet of numbers that would make Claire's jaw drop. It started 3 years ago, in the quiet hours after another family dinner where I'd been sidelined. I was 26, sitting cross-legged on my bedroom floor, surrounded by sketches and fabric scraps, my eyes burning from tears and exhaustion. I'd just overheard Ethan tell Mom my designs were cute but not scalable, like I was some kid playing dress-up. I clenched a piece of linen in my fist, the texture rough against my palm, and something snapped. I wasn't going to beg for their validation anymore. I was going to build something undeniable. That night, I stayed up until dawn sketching a business plan for a sustainable fashion brand. Ethical materials, fair labor, designs that told stories. I called it Threadbare Truth, a name that felt like a quiet rebellion against their polished, perfect world. The struggle was brutal. I worked 2 jobs, waitressing by day, freelancing graphic design at night to fund it. My hands trembled as I signed my first loan, a $10,000 gamble that made my stomach churn. I'd lie awake at 3 a.m., second-guessing every decision, wondering if Claire was right, if I was just chasing a pipe dream. But then I'd think of her smirk, Ethan's eye rolls, Mom's pitying sighs, and I'd drag myself to my sewing machine. I sourced organic cotton from a small farm in Georgia, spent hours on calls with suppliers in India, convincing them to trust a nobody with no track record. My first collection, 10 pieces, each one hand-stitched, was a disaster. The sizing was off, the shipping delayed. I lost $3,000 and cried into a glass of cheap wine, my cat, Luna, curling up beside me as if she knew. But I didn't quit. I learned. I tweaked the designs, streamlined production, built a website on a shoestring budget. By year 2, I'd hired Sarah, a marketing genius who believed in me when I barely believed in myself. We worked out of my apartment, coffee mugs piling up, our voices hoarse from pitching to retailers. The aha moment came at a trade show in Chicago. I stood at our tiny booth, my heart pounding as buyers passed by, barely glancing at our display. Then a woman stopped, mid-40s, sharp suit, sharper eyes. She ran her fingers over a linen dress, her brow furrowing. "This is different," she said, almost to herself. "Who's behind this?" I stepped forward, my voice shaky but clear. "Me, Mia Carter." She looked me up and down like she was sizing up my soul. "You've got something here," she said, handing me her card. She was a buyer for a major eco-conscious retailer. That one conversation led to our first big order. 500 pieces, $50,000 up front. From there, it snowballed. Sarah and I scaled up, hiring a small team, moving into a real office. We landed deals with boutiques across the country, then a feature in a major fashion blog. By last month, Threadbare Truth was pulling in 7 figures annually with talks of international expansion. I kept it all quiet. No social media boasts, no family announcements, not out of shame, but because I wanted the moment to be perfect. I wanted to walk into that family dinner, their voices dripping with condescension, and drop the truth like a bomb. I could already see Claire's face, her smugness crumbling. Ethan's phone slipping from his hand. Mom and Dad, for once, speechless. I sank onto my couch, Luna hopping up to nudge my hand. I scratched her ears, my eyes drifting to the corkboard where a new sketch was pinned. A dress for our next collection, bold and unapologetic. My phone buzzed again, and this time I opened the email. Sarah's words jumped out. "Mia, it's happening. They want to meet tomorrow. $10 million investment on the table." My breath caught. Tomorrow, the same day as the family dinner. The timing was almost too perfect, like the universe was handing me a script. I leaned back, a slow smile spreading across my face. I'd spent years building this in the shadows, pouring every ounce of myself into it while they looked the other way. Now, the world was about to see what I'd done, and so would they. I stood, pacing the room, my bare feet soft against the hardwood. My hands moved restlessly, straightening a stack of fabric samples, adjusting a photo frame of me and Sarah at our first pop-up shop. The weight of the past, those ignored certificates, those untouched jackets, felt lighter now, like a coat I could finally shrug off. I wasn't just the family outcast anymore. I was Mia Carter, the woman who'd built an empire from nothing. And tomorrow, when I walked into that dinner, I wouldn't be begging for their approval. I'd be carrying a truth they couldn't ignore, a success they couldn't diminish. I glanced at my phone again, Sarah's email still open. $10 million. A deal that could take Threadbare Truth global. I set the phone down, my heart steady for the first time all night. Let them try to call my work a hobby tomorrow. Let them try to make me small. I was ready. I woke to the soft buzz of my phone, the screen glowing with a text from Sarah. "Meeting at 2 p.m. You ready?" My stomach flipped as I sat up, the morning light spilling through my bedroom window, catching the edges of my sketchbook on the nightstand. Today was the day, 2 massive moments colliding like freight trains. The $10 million investment meeting that could catapult Threadbare Truth to the global stage, and the annual family dinner, where I'd face the same people who'd spent years dismissing me. I swung my legs out of bed, my bare feet hitting the cool hardwood, and took a deep breath. The air felt charged, like the calm before a storm. I wasn't just preparing for a meeting or a dinner. I was preparing for a reckoning. I moved through my morning on autopilot, my hands steady but my mind racing. In the shower, the hot water pounded my shoulders as I rehearsed my pitch for the investors. Every statistic, every projection, every reason why Threadbare Truth was worth their millions. I'd practiced it 100 times with Sarah, but today, it felt different, heavier. My fingers lingered on the shampoo bottle, my eyes unfocused. If this deal went through, it wouldn't just be a win for the company, it would be proof, to myself, to my family, that I'd built something real, something they couldn't ignore. I stepped out, wrapping a towel around me, and caught my reflection in the mirror. My jaw was set, my eyes sharp. I looked like someone who knew what she was fighting for. Dressing was deliberate. I chose a blazer from our latest collection, charcoal, tailored, made from organic linen I'd sourced myself. It hugged my frame, professional but unapologetically me. I paired it with dark jeans and boots, my hair pulled back in a sleek ponytail. No frills, no apologies. I wanted to walk into both rooms today, investor boardroom and family dining room, looking like the woman I'd become, not the girl they still saw. My phone buzzed again as I grabbed my keys, another text from Sarah. "You've got this, Mia. Blow them away." I smiled, my thumb brushing the screen. Sarah had been there through every late night, every setback. She knew what this meant to me. The drive to the city was quiet, the radio off, my thoughts loud enough to fill the silence. I passed familiar landmarks, the coffee shop where I'd sketched my first designs, the park where I'd cried after losing that $3,000 order. Each one felt like a breadcrumb leading me to this moment. By the time I parked outside the sleek office building where the investors waited, my hands were steady, my pulse even. I grabbed my laptop bag, the weight of it grounding me, and stepped out into the crisp afternoon air. The meeting was at 2 p.m., the dinner at 7. 5 hours to secure my future, then face my past. Inside, the boardroom was all glass and steel, the kind of place that screamed money. The investors, 3 men and 2 women, all in sharp suits, greeted me with polite nods. I set up my laptop, my fingers brushing the keys as I pulled up the presentation. Sarah was there, her eyes catching mine with a quick, encouraging nod. "Mia Carter, founder of Threadbare Truth," I began, my voice clear despite the knot in my chest. I walked them through it. The numbers, the growth, the vision. My hands moved as I spoke, gesturing to charts showing our revenue climb, photos of our designs on real people, not models. I told the story of the Georgia farmer who supplied our cotton, the artisans in India we'd partnered with. Every slide was a piece of me, a piece of the dream I'd fought for. They asked questions, tough ones, about scalability, competition, risks. I answered each one, my voice steady, my eyes meeting theirs. One of the women, Miss Harper, leaned forward, her pen tapping her notepad. "Why you, Mia?" she asked. "Why should we bet on you?" My breath caught, but I didn't falter. I leaned forward, mirroring her. "Because I've built this from nothing," I said. "No connections, no handouts, just me and a vision I refuse to let die. I know what it takes to fight for something no one else believes in." She held my gaze, then nodded, scribbling something down. When the meeting ended, they shook my hand, promising a decision soon. Sarah squeezed my arm as we left, whispering, "You killed it." I nodded, but my mind was already shifting to the dinner. The drive to Aunt Linda's house felt longer than it should have, the city fading into suburban streets lined with neat lawns and familiar mailboxes. My hands tightened on the wheel as I pulled into her driveway, the same one where I'd stormed out last weekend. The house loomed ahead, warm light spilling from the windows, the smell of roast chicken drifting out as I approached the door. My heart thudded, not from nerves but from something fiercer. I wasn't here to play nice anymore. I was here to face them, to stand in the truth of who I was. I adjusted my blazer, my fingers brushing the linen, and rang the doorbell. It chimed, sharp and clear, like a warning shot. Aunt Linda opened the door, her smile warm but cautious. "Mia, you made it," she said, pulling me into a quick hug. I nodded, stepping inside, the chatter of voices hitting me like a wave. Claire's laugh, Ethan's low murmur, Mom's soft hum as she set the table. Dad's silence, as always, a presence of its own. I set my bag down, my boots clicking on the hardwood as I walked into the dining room. Every eye turned to me, and for a moment, the air felt thick, expectant. Claire raised an eyebrow, her wineglass paused mid-sip. "Well, look who decided to show up," she said, her tone light but edged with venom. I met her gaze, my lips curving into a small, steady smile. Let her try, let them all try. Tonight I wasn't just Mia, the family outcast. I was Mia Carter, and I was ready. The dining room smelled of roast chicken and tension, the clink of silverware against plates punctuating the low hum of conversation. I stood in the doorway, my blazer still crisp from the investor meeting, my boots clicking softly as I crossed to my seat. Claire's eyes tracked me, her wineglass tilting slightly as she leaned back, that familiar smirk playing on her lips. Ethan was slouched in his chair, thumbing his phone under the table, While Mom fussed with a platter of green beans, her smile tight and practiced. Dad sat at the head of the table, his fork scraping his plate, his face unreadable as always. Aunt Linda hovered near the kitchen, her hands twisting a dish towel, sensing the storm brewing. I slid into my chair, the wood creaking under me, and reached for the water pitcher. "Nice of you to join us, Mia," Claire said, her voice honeyed but sharp, like a blade wrapped in silk. "We weren't sure you'd show after last weekend's performance." Her eyes flicked to the others, fishing for laughs. Ethan snorted, not looking up. Mom's lips pursed, her hands pausing over the beans. I poured my water, the glass cool against my fingers, and set the pitcher down with deliberate care. "I'm here," I said, my voice even, meeting her gaze. "Wouldn't miss it." Claire raised an eyebrow, clearly expecting me to shrink. "Oh good," she said, swirling her wine. "Because we've got plenty to discuss. Like how you think you can just waltz in and out of this family whenever it suits you." My fingers tightened around my glass, the cold biting into my palm. I could feel Mom's eyes on me, pleading for peace, but I wasn't here to play that role anymore. "Funny," I said, leaning back. "I thought family was supposed to show up for each other, not just when it's convenient." Her smirk faltered, just for a second before she recovered. "Cute, Mia, always the martyr." She turned to Ethan, her voice louder now, performative. "Tell me, Ethan, how's your startup going? I hear you're about to close a big round." Ethan looked up, finally, his grin smug. "Yeah, $5 million in seed funding," he said, leaning forward. "We're scaling fast, just hired 10 new devs." Mom's face lit up, her hands clasping together. "That's incredible, honey," she said, her voice warm in a way it never was for me. Dad nodded, a rare spark of pride in his eyes. "Solid work, son," he said, his voice gruff but genuine. I sat there, my fork untouched, the roast chicken growing cold on my plate. The conversation swirled around me. Ethan's funding, Claire's latest courtroom win, Mom's gushing, Dad's quiet approval. I might as well have been invisible. My hands rested in my lap, one thumb rubbing the edge of my blazer, the linen grounding me. I thought of the investor meeting, the way Miss Harper's eyes had locked onto mine, seeing me. Really seeing me. Not this version of Mia, the one they'd boxed into a corner labeled failure. "So Mia," Claire said, her voice cutting through the chatter, "what's new with you? Still sewing?" The word dripped with disdain, and Ethan chuckled, his phone now face up on the table. Mom shot me a quick, nervous glance, like she was bracing for a fight. I set my fork down, the metal clinking softly against the plate, and leaned forward. "Actually," I said, my voice steady, "I've been busy. Running a company takes a lot of time." Claire's laugh was sharp, almost a bark. "A company?" she said, air quoting the word. "What, your little Etsy shop? Come on, Mia, let's be real." My jaw clenched, but I kept my eyes on hers. "It's a bit bigger than that," I said, my voice low but firm. 7 figures last year, international deals in the works." The table went quiet, the kind of silence that feels like it's holding its breath. Claire's smirk froze, her glass halfway to her lips. Ethan's thumb stopped scrolling. Mom's hand stilled, a green bean dangling from her tongs. Dad's fork paused, his eyes flicking up to meet mine for the first time all night. I let the moment hang, my heart pounding, but my face calm. "But sure," I added, picking up my fork, "call it sewing if that makes you feel better." Claire recovered quickly, her laugh forced. "Oh Mia, always with the big stories," she said, waving a hand. "You expect us to believe you're some fashion mogul now?" Ethan snorted again, muttering, "Yeah, right." Mom's smile was strained, her eyes darting between us. "Let's not argue," she said softly, but there was no conviction in it. Dad said nothing, his fork moving again like he'd already checked out. I stabbed a piece of chicken, my movements slow, deliberate. The condescension burned, but I wasn't surprised. This was the gauntlet I'd expected, the one I'd walked into willingly. They didn't believe me. Fine. They didn't have to yet. Aunt Linda reappeared, setting a pie on the table, her smile nervous. "Dessert, anyone?" she asked, her voice too bright. I nodded, pushing my plate away, my appetite gone. The conversation shifted, Claire steering it back to her latest case, Ethan chiming in about his investors. I sat back, my hands folded in my lap, my eyes drifting to the window where the night pressed against the glass. My phone was in my bag, silent but heavy with the weight of Sarah's last text. "They're impressed. Decision by tonight." I didn't need their approval. Not anymore. But as Claire's voice droned on, her words laced with that same patronizing tone, I felt the fire in my chest flare hotter. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The pie sat untouched in the center of the table, Aunt Linda's attempt at sweetness no match for the sourness in the air. Claire's voice carried on, recounting her latest courtroom triumph, with the kind of polish that made you feel like you were watching a performance, not a conversation. I sat quietly, my hands folded in my lap, the linen of my blazer brushing my wrists as I shifted slightly. My plate was clean, not from eating, but because I'd pushed the food around until it looked convincing. Ethan was back on his phone, his thumb flicking lazily, while Mom nodded along to Claire's story, her smile tight but dutiful. Dad's eyes were fixed on his plate, his fork moving methodically, like he was counting each bite to avoid engaging. The room felt like a pressure cooker, and I was the one they were waiting to see crack. Claire paused, taking a sip of wine, her eyes sliding toward me. "So Mia," she said, her tone deceptively casual, "you're awfully quiet. Still dreaming up your empire?" The word dripped with mockery, and Ethan chuckled without looking up. I felt my fingers curl, nails digging into my palms, but I kept my face neutral. "Just listening," I said, my voice calm, though my heart was thudding. She leaned forward, her elbows on the table, her smile sharp. "Good. Because we need to talk about something real now. The family trust." My stomach tightened. The trust. Dad's estate, the one they'd been bickering over since his health scare last year. I'd stayed out of it. Not because I didn't care, but because every time I opened my mouth they acted like I was invisible. I glanced at Dad, hoping for a sign he'd steer this away, but he just kept eating, his jaw tight. Mom's hands fidgeted with her napkin, her eyes darting between Claire and me. "Claire, maybe now's not," she started, but Claire cut her off with a wave of her hand. "No, Mom, it's time," Claire said, her voice firm, almost theatrical. She turned to me, her eyes narrowing. "Mia, you've been dodging this for months. The trust is for those of us who've contributed to this family's legacy. Ethan's building something tangible. I'm carrying the Carter name in court. But you?" She paused, letting the silence slice into me. "You're off playing with your little projects, contributing nothing. It's time we made things clear." I felt the air leave the room. My hands went still, the heat in my chest spreading like wildfire. "Clear how?" I asked, my voice low but steady. Claire leaned back, crossing her arms, her smirk returning. "You're out, Mia. We've talked, Mom, Dad, Ethan, me. You're not part of the trust anymore. You're not part of this family's future." The words hit like a slap, sharp and cold. Ethan looked up, his phone forgotten, his expression unreadable. Mom's face crumpled, her hands twisting the napkin into knots. Dad's fork stopped, but he didn't look at me. Aunt Linda gasped softly from the kitchen doorway, her dish towel falling limp in her hands. I opened my mouth, but no words came. My throat burned, my vision blurring for a split second before I blinked it away. Out. Disowned. The room felt smaller, the walls closing in, their faces a blur of judgment and indifference. I'd spent years swallowing their slights, their dismissals, but this was a guillotine, and Claire had just dropped the blade. "You can't be serious," I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. Claire shrugged, her lips pursed like she was discussing a business deal. "It's done. We voted. You're not pulling your weight, Mia. You never have." My hands trembled, but I pressed them against my thighs, grounding myself. I wanted to scream, to throw every ignored achievement, every sleepless night, every dollar I'd earned in their faces. But I didn't. Not yet. I looked at Mom, her eyes glistening, but she said nothing. Dad's silence was louder than ever, his fork now still, his gaze fixed on the table. Ethan shifted uncomfortably, his fingers tapping his phone case. "Claire, come on," he muttered, but it was half-hearted. Like he was just going through the motions. I felt the weight of their decision, the finality of it, like a door slamming shut. "You're wrong," I said, my voice stronger now, cutting through the silence. Claire's eyebrow arched, her smirk faltering. "I've been pulling my weight my whole life. You just never bothered to see it." She laughed, sharp and dismissive. "Oh, please, Mia. Your little sewing hobby doesn't count. This family needs real contributions, not daydreams." My nails dug deeper into my palms, the pain keeping me focused. I could feel the fire in me burning hotter, the years of being overlooked fueling it. I opened my mouth to fire back, but before I could, my phone buzzed in my bag, loud enough to make Ethan flinch. I ignored it, my eyes locked on Claire's. "You don't get to decide what counts," I said, each word deliberate, my voice trembling with restrained fury. "You don't get to erase me." Claire leaned forward, ready to fire back, but Mom's voice broke through, small and shaky. "Mia, honey, let's not do this now." I turned to her, my chest aching. "When, Mom? When is it ever my turn?" Her lips parted, but no words came. The silence stretched, heavy and suffocating, until my phone buzzed again, insistent. I reached for my bag, my hands moving on instinct, and pulled it out. The screen glowed with Sarah's name, a call, not a text. My heart skipped. I stood, the chair scraping loudly against the floor, and stepped away from the table, their eyes burning into my back as I answered. I stepped into the hallway, my phone pressed to my ear, the dining room's heavy silence fading behind me. Sarah's voice crackled through, urgent and bright. "Mia, you're not going to believe this," she said, barely pausing for breath. "They're in. $10 million signed and sealed. We're going global." My heart stopped, then slammed into overdrive. I gripped the phone tighter, my back against the wall, the cool plaster grounding me as the words sank in. $10 million. Threadbare truth wasn't just my dream anymore. It was real, undeniable, a force. I closed my eyes, a shaky breath escaping. "Sarah, you're sure?" I whispered, my voice barely steady. "I'm looking at the contract right now," she said, her excitement spilling over. "They're calling you a visionary, Mia. You did this." I opened my eyes, staring at the framed family photos lining Aunt Linda's hallway, smiling faces from years ago, when I still thought I could belong. The weight of Claire's words from moments ago, "You're out, Mia," clashed with Sarah's, each syllable of her call rewriting the script in my head. I wasn't out. I was in, bigger than they could ever imagine. My fingers brushed the edge of my blazer, the linen a reminder of the empire I'd built from nothing. "I'll call you back," I said, my voice steadier now. Sarah laughed. "You better celebrate tonight, Mia. You earned it." I hung up, my hand trembling as I slipped the phone into my pocket. I turned back toward the dining room, the chatter picking up again. Claire's voice, sharp and self-assured, Ethan's low hum of agreement. My boots clicked on the hardwood as I walked back, each step deliberate, like I was marching into battle. The table came into view, the pie still untouched, the air thick with the aftermath of Claire's verdict. I stood in the doorway, my hands loose at my sides, my chin high. Every eye turned to me, Claire's smirk returning like a reflex. "What was that?" she asked, her tone mocking. "Another one of your business calls?" Ethan snickered, his phone back in his hand. Mom's eyes flicked to me, nervous, her napkin twisted into a tight knot. I didn't sit. I leaned against the doorframe, crossing my arms, letting the moment stretch. "Yeah," I said, my voice calm but laced with steel. "A business call. Just closed a $10 million investment deal." The room went still, the kind of silence that sucks the air out of everything. Claire's smirk froze, her wine glass tilting slightly in her hand. Ethan's thumb stopped mid-scroll, his eyes snapping up to meet mine. Mom's mouth parted, her napkin slipping to the table. Dad's fork clattered against his plate, his gaze finally lifting, wide and unblinking. Aunt Linda, hovering near the kitchen, let out a soft gasp, her hand flying to her mouth. Claire recovered first, her laugh sharp and forced. $10 million? Mia, come on, you expect us to believe that? She leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. "What, did you sell a few scarves on Etsy?" Ethan snorted, but it was weaker this time, his gaze flickering with uncertainty. I didn't flinch. I reached into my bag, pulled out my phone and opened the email from Sarah. The contract confirmation, the numbers stark and real. I held it up, the screen glowing in the dim light. "Threadbare truth," I said, my voice steady. 7 figures last year, international deals lined up, and now a $10 million investment to go global. That's my little sewing hobby. Claire's face paled, her lips parting but no words coming out. Ethan's phone slipped from his hand, landing with a soft thud on the table. Mom's hands trembled, her eyes darting between me and the screen. Dad leaned forward, his brow furrowing as he squinted at the email. "Mia," he said, his voice low, almost disbelieving. "Is this real?" I nodded, holding his gaze. "It's real, Dad. I built it. Me." The silence stretched again, heavier this time, like the room was holding its breath. Aunt Linda stepped forward, her eyes shining. "Mia, that's incredible," she said, her voice breaking the tension. Claire's jaw tightened, her fingers gripping her glass so hard I thought it might crack. "So what?" she said, her voice sharp but shaky. You got lucky. Doesn't change anything, you're still not part of this family's legacy. My chest burned, but I didn't look away. You're right, I said, my voice low and deliberate. I'm not part of your legacy, I'm building my own. Ethan shifted, his eyes darting to Claire, then back to me. Wait, Mia, hold on, he said, his tone softer, almost pleading. You didn't tell us any of this. I laughed, short and bitter. I tried. You didn't listen. Mom reached out, her hand hovering over mine but not touching. Mia, honey, we didn't know, she said, her voice trembling. Why didn't you say something? I pulled my hand back, my eyes locking on hers. I did, over and over. You were too busy praising Claire's cases and Ethan's startups to hear me. The words hung in the air, raw and unfiltered. Dad's face fell, his shoulders slumping like the weight of my words had finally hit him. Claire opened her mouth to speak, but I cut her off, my voice rising just enough to command the room. I'm done begging for your approval. I don't need it, not anymore. I turned, my boots loud against the floor, and grabbed my bag. The room was silent behind me, no one moving, no one speaking. I could feel their eyes, their shock, their scrambling to process what I'd just laid bare. My phone buzzed again. Probably Sarah, probably another update, but I didn't check it. I didn't need to. I'd said what I needed to say. I walked toward the door, my heart pounding but my steps sure, the fire in my chest burning brighter than ever. I stood in the doorway, my hand on the knob, the cool metal grounding me as the dining room's silence pressed against my back. The weight of their shock hung in the air. Claire's frozen smirk, Ethan's dropped phone, Mom's trembling hands, Dad's unblinking stare. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Probably Sarah again, but I let it hum, my focus razor sharp on the moment. I just dropped a bomb, my $10 million truth exploding their carefully crafted narrative about me. But I wasn't done. Not yet. I turned back, facing them, my boots planted firm on Aunt Linda's hardwood floor. The fire in my chest wasn't just anger anymore. It was clarity, sharp and unyielding. Claire was the first to break, her laugh brittle, like glass about to shatter. So, what, Mia? You wave around some email and think you're better than us? Her voice was loud, too loud, like she was trying to convince herself more than me. Her fingers tapped her wine glass, the rhythm uneven, betraying her nerves. I tilted my head, my eyes locked on hers. Better than you? No, I said, my voice calm but cutting. I just don't need to tear anyone down to feel big. Her lips parted, but nothing came out. For once she was speechless, her usual quick wit failing her. I stepped forward, my hands loose at my sides, my blazer brushing my wrists as I moved. You know what's funny? I said, my gaze sweeping the table, catching Ethan's uneasy glance, Mom's wide eyes, Dad's furrowed brow. You spent years telling me I was nothing, a dreamer, a failure. But I was out there building something real while you were busy patting yourselves on the back. I paused, letting the words sink in. Ethan shifted, his phone forgotten, his fingers twitching like he wanted to say something but didn't know how. Mom's hands twisted her napkin again, her knuckles white. Dad's fork was still, his eyes on me, really on me, for the first time in years. Claire, I said, turning to her, my voice steady but laced with years of pent-up hurt. You called my work a hobby? Said I wasn't pulling my weight, but I've been carrying more than you'll ever know. Late nights, loans, failures you never saw because you never asked. Her jaw tightened, her eyes flashing, but I didn't stop. Ethan, I said, shifting my gaze, you laughed when I told you about my designs, said they'd never scale. Well, guess what? They did, bigger than your startup dreams. He flinched, his face reddening, but he didn't look away. I turned to Mom, my voice softening but not wavering. And you, Mom, you always told me to keep the peace, to stay small so everyone else could shine, but I'm done shrinking. Her eyes filled with tears, her lips trembling, but she didn't speak. I looked at Dad last, his silence louder than ever. Dad, I said, my throat tightening, you never once asked what I was working on. Not once. But I built something anyway, without you. The room was so quiet I could hear the faint tick of the clock in the living room. Aunt Linda stood frozen in the kitchen doorway, her dish towel limp in her hands, her eyes glistening. Claire's fingers stopped tapping, her glass still, her face pale. Ethan's hands were flat on the table, his usual smirk gone. Mom's tears spilled over, one rolling down her cheek, catching the light. Dad's shoulders slumped, his eyes dropping to his plate, like he couldn't bear to meet mine anymore. You disowned me, I said, my voice rising just enough to fill the space. You said I wasn't part of this family's legacy. But you know what? I don't want your legacy. It's built on hypocrisy, celebrating each other's wins while stepping on mine. I took a step back, my boots clicking, my heart pounding but my resolve unbreakable. I've got my own legacy now. Threadbare truth. $10 million and counting. And I did it without a single one of you. Claire opened her mouth, her voice hoarse. Mia, you can't just... I held up a hand, cutting her off. I'm not done, I said, my tone final. You don't get to rewrite this now. You don't get to pretend you believed in me all along. I reached for my bag, slinging it over my shoulder, my movements slow and deliberate. I came here tonight hoping for something. Maybe an apology, maybe a chance. But I don't need it anymore. I'm enough. I turned, my boots loud against the floor, and walked toward the door. Behind me, I heard Mom's voice, small and broken. Mia, wait. But I didn't stop. I didn't look back. The doorknob was cool under my hand, the night air sharp as I stepped outside. My phone buzzed again, and this time I checked it. A text from Sarah. Contracts in your inbox. You're a rock star. I smiled, small but real, and slipped the phone back into my pocket. The stars were bright above Aunt Linda's house net, the street quiet, except for the faint hum of crickets. I walked to my car, my steps lighter, like I'd shed a weight I'd carried too long. I slid into the driver's seat, the leather creaking under me, and rested my hands on the wheel. The dining room, the family, their stunned faces, they felt like a memory already, fading with every breath. I wasn't running away. I was walking toward something better, something mine. The engine roared to life, and as I pulled out of the driveway, the road stretching dark and open before me, I felt it. Freedom. The city lights blurred past as I drove. The hum of the engine a steady counterpoint to the storm still swirling in my chest. I'd left Aunt Linda's house behind, the weight of their stunned silence fading with every mile. My phone sat in the passenger seat, its screen dark now, but Sarah's text, "You're a rock star," still glowed in my mind. I wasn't heading home. Not yet. There was somewhere else I needed to be, someone I needed to see. My hands tightened on the wheel as I turned toward the warehouse district, where Sarah and the team were waiting. They were my chosen family, the ones who'd seen me when my own blood hadn't. I pulled into the lot outside our office, a converted warehouse with big windows and a threadbare truth sign glowing softly above the door. The lights were on inside, spilling warm gold onto the pavement. I parked, my boots crunching on the gravel as I stepped out, the night air cool against my face. My blazer felt like armor now, the linen crisp despite the long day. I pushed open the door, the familiar smell of coffee and fabric dye hitting me like a hug. Sarah was there, leaning over a table strewn with sketches, her curly hair pulled into a messy bun. Next to her was Javier, our lead designer, his hands moving animatedly as he pinned fabric swatches to a mood board. Lena, our logistics guru, was at her laptop, her glasses reflecting the screen's glow. Sarah looked up, her face breaking into a grin. "There she is," she called, tossing a marker onto the table. "The $10 million woman!" Xavier whooped, his hands clapping together, and Lena spun in her chair, her smile wide. I laughed, the sound surprising me, raw and real after the suffocation of the dinner. I dropped my bag by the door, my shoulders loosening as I crossed the room. "You guys didn't have to wait up," I said, but my voice was warm, grateful. Sarah waved a hand, dismissing it. "Are you kidding? We're celebrating. This is huge, Mia." She pulled me into a hug, her arms tight, and I let myself sink into it, the tension from the dinner melting away. Javier joined in, slinging an arm around my shoulders, his cologne sharp and familiar. "You killed it today," he said, his voice thick with pride. "Those investors didn't stand a chance." Lena stood, pushing her glasses up her nose, and handed me a mug of coffee, still steaming. "To Mia," she said, raising her own mug. "The visionary who made this happen." I took the mug, my fingers wrapping around its warmth, and felt my eyes sting. Not from pain this time, but from something softer, something I hadn't felt at that dining room table. Belonging. We sat around the table, the sketches and swatches pushed aside to make room for a bottle of cheap champagne Sarah had grabbed from a corner store. The bubbles fizzed as she poured, the glasses clinking in a messy, joyful toast. "To going global," Sarah said, her eyes locked on mine. "And to you, Mia, for never giving up." I smiled, my throat tight, and raised my glass. To us, I said, my voice steady, because I didn't do this alone. Javier grinned, nudging my shoulder. Damn right you didn't. But you started it, that's what counts. We talked for hours, the conversation flowing easy and warm, so different from the stilted, barbed exchanges at Aunt Linda's. Sarah recounted the investor meeting, mimicking Ms. Harper's sharp nod with exaggerated precision, making us laugh. Javier showed me his latest design, a bold asymmetrical dress inspired by my story, he said, his hands gesturing wildly as he described the concept. Lena pulled up spreadsheets, her excitement spilling over as she mapped out logistics for international shipping. I leaned back in my chair, my boots propped on a stool, the champagne buzzing in my veins. This was what family felt like. Not the cold judgment of blood ties, but the warmth of people who saw you, who chose you. I thought of the dining room, the way Claire's smirk had crumbled, Ethan's phone slipping from his hand, Mom's tears, Dad's silence. It still hurt, a dull ache deep in my chest, but it didn't define me anymore. Here, surrounded by my team, I was whole. I was enough. Sarah caught my eye, her smile softening. You okay? She asked, her voice low, just for me. I nodded, my fingers tracing the rim of my glass. Yeah, I said, and I meant it. I'm more than okay. The night stretched on, the warehouse quiet except for our laughter and the hum of the city outside. I glanced at the mood board, Javier's sketches vibrant and alive, a reminder of what we'd built together. My phone stayed silent. No texts from Mom, no apologies from Claire, no belated questions from Dad. And that was okay. I didn't need them to chase me. I had this, Sarah's fierce belief, Javier's creativity, Lena's precision. They were my people, the ones who'd stood by me when my family hadn't. As I sipped the last of my champagne, the bubbles sharp on my tongue, I felt a quiet certainty settle in my bones. I'd walked away from that dinner, but I'd walked toward something better. Something real. The warehouse lights dimmed as the night wore on, the champagne bottle empty on the table, its foil cap crumpled beside Javier's sketches. Sarah, Javier, and Lena had left an hour ago, their hugs lingering as they headed home, their voices still echoing in my mind, proud, warm, real. I stayed behind, alone now in the quiet office, my boots propped on a chair, my hands wrapped around a cooling mug of coffee. The city hummed faintly beyond the windows, a distant pulse that matched the steady beat of my thoughts. My phone sat dark on the table, no messages from my family, not even a tentative text from Mom. The silence didn't sting as much as I'd expected. It was just there, like a fact I could finally accept. I leaned back, my eyes drifting to the corkboard where Javier's latest design was pinned, a dress that screamed defiance, all sharp lines and bold colors. It felt like me, or at least the me I was becoming. Last night's dinner, Claire's verdict, the $10 million call, they'd shifted something fundamental, like a fault line cracking open. I wasn't just walking away from my family's toxicity. I was building a fortress around the life I'd earned. My hands moved, almost on instinct, straightening a stack of fabric swatches, their textures grounding me as I sorted through what came next. The first boundary was simple, no more chasing their approval. I'd spent years twisting myself into knots, hoping for a nod from Dad, a genuine smile from Mom, a moment where Claire or Ethan saw me as more than a punchline. No more. I pulled out my phone, my thumb hovering over Mom's contact. Part of me wanted to call, to give her one last chance to say something, anything that wasn't laced with pity or expectation. But I set the phone down, my fingers curling into my palm. She'd had years to show up for me. If she wanted to now, she'd have to make the first move. I stood, pacing the office, my boots soft against the concrete floor. The second boundary was about access. Claire's voice still echoed, "You're out, Mia," and I could still see Ethan's smirk, Mom's tears, Dad's silence. They didn't get to waltz back into my life now, not after dismissing me for so long. I'd answer if they called, but I wouldn't beg for their attention. I wouldn't invite them to my world unless they earned it. My world was here. Threadbare truth, Sarah's fierce loyalty, Javier's sketches, Lena's spreadsheets. My world was the $10 million deal that proved I was enough, with or without them. I stopped by the window, the city lights glittering below, and thought about the dinner's aftermath. Claire would probably spin this, tell her friends I'd exaggerated my success. Ethan might text half-hearted, trying to play nice now that he knew the numbers. Mom might call, her voice soft and teary, promising to fix things. Dad, Dad would stay silent like always. I pressed my forehead against the cool glass, my breath fogging the pan. Let them do whatever they wanted. I wasn't playing their game anymore. My rules were clear: respect me or stay out. My phone buzzed, not a call but an email notification. I glanced at it. Sarah, forwarding the final contract, the $10 million figure bolded in the text. I smiled, small but steady, and set the phone down again. The deal was real, but so was the work ahead. Meetings with suppliers, hiring new staff, planning the international launch. It would be grueling, but it was mine. I walked back to the table, my fingers brushing Javier's sketch, the fabric swatches, the empty champagne glasses. This was my fortress, built on years of grit and defiance. My family couldn't touch it. I thought of Sarah's grin, Javier's clap on my shoulder, Lena's quiet toast. They'd shown up for me, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. That was the third boundary, surrounding myself with people who saw my worth. I'd spent too long letting my family's judgment define me, letting their voices drown out my own. No more. I'd choose my allies, people like Sarah, who'd stayed up with me through every crisis, Javier, who turned my ideas into art, Lena, who made the impossible possible. They were my foundation now, not the Carters. I sank back into my chair, my hands resting on the table, the coffee mug cold now but still comforting. The warehouse was quiet, the city's hum a soft backdrop. I felt steady. Not angry, not hurt, just clear. My family's disownment had cut deep, but it had also freed me. I didn't need their validation anymore. I had my own. I pulled out a notebook, jotting down next steps for the business. Supplier calls, marketing plans, a new hire for logistics. My pen moved fast, the ink smudging slightly under my hand. This was my life now, and I was done letting anyone else write the rules. The morning sun spilled through the warehouse windows, painting the concrete floor in soft gold. I sat at my desk, a fresh cup of coffee steaming beside my laptop, the screen open to a draft press release about our $10 million deal. My fingers hovered over the keys, the words, "Threadbare Truth," bold at the top, a name that felt like a declaration now. The office was quiet, Sarah and the team not due in for another hour, but I'd come early, my boots still damp from the morning dew outside. Last night's clarity had settled into something solid, a resolve to not just live my success but to use it, to take the Carter name, the one they'd tried to strip from me, and make it mean something new. I leaned back, my hands resting on the desk, the wood worn smooth from months of late nights. The family dinner felt like a lifetime ago. Claire's verdict, "You're out, Mia," a fading echo. I wasn't out. I was here, building something that mattered. My eyes drifted to a framed photo on the wall, one Sarah had insisted we hang. Me at our first pop-up shop, holding up a dress, my smile wide and unguarded. That Mia had fought for every inch of this dream, and now she was going to rewrite the story. Not for revenge, but for impact. For legacy. I opened a new document, my fingers moving fast as I typed. Threadbare Truth wasn't just about clothes. It was about stories, about giving voice to the overlooked, the underestimated. I'd been that person my whole life, and I knew there were others out there, people whose dreams were dismissed as hobbies, whose worth was measured by someone else's yardstick. My hands paused, the cursor blinking. What if we used this moment, this $10 million moment, to do more? I started jotting ideas, a mentorship program for young designers from underserved communities, workshops on sustainable fashion, a scholarship fund for kids like me who'd had to scrape by on grit and late-night coffee. The door swung open, Sarah bursting in with her usual energy, a bag of bagels tucked under her arm. "Morning, boss," she called, tossing the bag onto the table. I smiled, closing my laptop. "You're early," I said, reaching for a bagel. She shrugged, her curls bouncing. "Couldn't sleep, too excited about world domination." She winked, but her eyes softened as she sat across from me. "You look different today, good different." I nodded, tearing off a piece of bagel, the dough warm in my fingers. "I'm done letting them define me," I said simply. "I'm taking the Carter name and making it mine." Sarah's grin widened. "Hell yeah, you are." She leaned forward, her hands clasped. "So what's the plan?" "I know you've got one." I laughed, the sound light, and opened my laptop again, showing her the document. "This," I said, scrolling through the ideas. "We're not just going global, we're giving back, mentorships, scholarships, platforms for people who don't get a seat at the table." Sarah's eyes lit up, her fingers tapping the table. "Mia, this is huge, this is..." You. I nodded, my chest warm. Exactly. By noon, the office was buzzing. Javier arrived, sketching new designs inspired by the mentorship idea. Bold patterns, vibrant colors, pieces that screamed confidence. Lena was on a call with a supplier, her voice sharp as she negotiated better terms for our expanded production. I moved between them, my boots clicking, my hands gesturing as we brainstormed. The energy was electric, like we were building something bigger than ourselves. I paused by Javier's desk, watching him sketch, his pencil flying across the page. "This is for the kids in the program," he said, not looking up. "Something to make them feel unstoppable." I squeezed his shoulder, my throat tight. Perfect. Later I stepped outside for air, the city humming around me. My phone buzzed, a text from Mom. "Mia, can we talk?" it read, simple, tentative. I stared at it, my thumb hovering over the screen. Part of me wanted to reply, to hear her out, but another part, the one that had walked out of that dinner, wasn't ready. I slipped the phone back into my pocket, my eyes on the horizon. Maybe I'd answer later. Maybe I wouldn't. But it was my choice now, not theirs. I walked back inside, my steps sure, and joined the team at the table. We were planning a launch event for the mentorship program, something public, something bold. The Carter name would be on it, not their version, but mine. A legacy of empowerment, of second chances, of dreams made real. As I spoke, my hands moving, my voice steady, I felt the weight of my past lift. I wasn't just reclaiming my name, I was redefining it, for me, for the team, for every kid out there who'd been told they weren't enough. This was my impact, my truth. And no one could take it away. The warehouse was quiet now, the team gone home, the city's hums softened by the late hour. I sat at my desk, the glow of my laptop casting shadows across the fabric swatches and half-finished sketches scattered around me. My coffee was cold, the mug's handle worn smooth from days of gripping it through long nights. My boots were kicked off under the table, my feet tucked beneath me as I stared at the press release draft on my screen. Threadbare Truth announces $10 million investment and mentorship program for aspiring designers. The words felt right, solid, like a promise kept. But as I leaned back, my hands resting in my lap, my mind wasn't on the business anymore. It was on me. On the Mia who'd walked out of that dinner, who'd faced the family's verdict and found something stronger inside. I thought about the girl I used to be, the one who'd sat at the kitchen table at 16 clutching a sketchbook, waiting for someone to notice her. That Mia had carried a quiet ache, a need to be seen, to be enough. She'd spent years chasing it, bending herself to fit their mold, hoping for a nod, a smile, a moment of pride that never came. I could still feel her sometimes, that ache like a bruise that hadn't quite healed. But now, sitting here, the warehouse silent except for the faint creak of the building settling, I realized something. I didn't need their validation anymore. I never had. My fingers brushed the edge of a swatch, the organic cotton soft and familiar. Threadbare Truth wasn't just a business, it was my proof, my truth. My way of saying I was enough. Every late night, every loan, every failure and triumph had built this, and it was mine. Not Claire's, not Ethan's, not Mom's or Dad's. Mine. I closed my eyes, letting the realization settle. It wasn't about the $10 million, though that was real. It wasn't about the mentorship program, though that was my heart. It was about knowing deep in my bones that my worth didn't depend on their approval. It never had. I stood, stretching, my bare feet cool against the concrete. The warehouse felt like home now, more than Aunt Linda's dining room ever had. I walked to the window, the city lights twinkling below, each one a story, a dream, a fight. I thought of Sarah's grin, Javier's sketches, Lena's spreadsheets, the people who'd chosen me, who'd seen me when my family hadn't. They were my legacy too, not just the business but the bonds we'd formed. My phone sat on the desk, still silent, Mom's text from earlier unanswered. I'd read it again tomorrow, maybe reply, maybe not. But it didn't weigh on me anymore. I was free to choose. I turned back to my desk, my eyes catching the framed photo of that first pop-up shop. My smile in it was so unguarded, so full of hope. I'd been scared then, unsure if Threadbare Truth would survive, but I'd kept going. That was the real victory, not the money, not the deals, but the refusal to stop. I sat down, my hands moving to the keyboard, and added a line to the press release. Founded by Mia Carter, Threadbare Truth is a testament to the power of perseverance and self-belief. It felt right, not boastful, just true. The clock on the wall ticked past midnight, the city outside settling into its quiet rhythm. I leaned back, my hands behind my head, and let out a slow breath. Peace wasn't something I'd expected to find, not after the family's betrayal, not after years of fighting to be seen. But it was here, in this moment, in the quiet of my own space. I wasn't angry anymore, I wasn't hurt, I was whole. I'd built something beautiful, not to prove them wrong but to prove myself right, and that was enough. Have you ever had to fight to prove your worth, to yourself or someone else? Share your story in the comments, I'd love to hear it. If my journey resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to hear that it's okay to define success on their own terms. You don't need anyone's permission to be enough. You already are.